Yeah.
Evan, so great to chat this morning. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm pretty good considering everything, but I'm pretty good. Thanks. How
Yeah,
are you?
I'm doing well. I'm up here in Portland and it's like a blue sky. We're finally hitting the stride of spring and sun and out of the bleak gray winter. And it just feels, I don't know. I mean, it offsets so much in life to just have sun in the sky. I know down where you're at, you get a little more of the glowing orb in the sky, but for us it's it's a little rarer.
Yeah, we're very lucky, and it was 92 degrees in the city a couple days ago, which is very rare here, and so I'm very glad for 58 this morning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing where if you're not complaining about the cold, like as soon as it starts getting warm, you hear people complaining about
Yeah.
the heat. Oh man. Well, good. Well, so glad we can chat today. This is something you and I have talked about a little bit off camera and just between you and I, but I was hearing some of the really interesting thoughts and ideas that you were bringing to the table, and I was like, oh man, this is something I wanna I wanna chat about because I think other people are interested in it as well, just looking and seeing at what is the new reality around workplace culture. It's such an interesting dynamic time exiting, the COVID lockdown, upside down weirdness. And, I know there's a lot of different feelings and sensibilities about, okay, where do we go from here? What does it look like? And
Mhm.
I know you and Edelman have been tapping into, sort of researching and diving into this and helping, organizations of all scales sort of figure out, okay, how do we navigate this new reality. So just love to unpack that with you today and dive into that. I think there's a recent study or something y'all completed.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot actually in just what you said too. And for those in the audience who may not know me, I'm Evan Graner, and I'm a VP on the employee experience team at Edelman, which is the world's largest privately held PR and communications firm. Um, and so when I say I'm in our employee experience practice, I don't consult Edelman's employees. I consult with my clients to create better experiences for their employees, and have a background in higher education, financial services, and also building workplace culture. And culture, which you brought up in your opening remarks, Tom, is like my informal definition, and is the informal definition for some others as well, as how things get done around here when around here is at work. And the that the how things get done around here has been in constant flux for the last 2 years, except in some rare cases where companies have made very clear, very concrete decisions about how they want that to operate at their particular firm. So uh, as we think about, how is our relationship to work changing, how is the nature of work changing, and how does sort of the way things get done around here also changing, just in terms of like hybrid, fully remote, do you have to be in an office, those kinds of things. um, this is something that Microsoft is one of our clients, which is no secret to anybody. Is very interested in studying, obviously, because they have the tools that many of us use. They create the tools that many of us use at work every day. And so for the last couple of years, our Edelman data and insights team, DXI, we call them, data intelligence rather, team DXI, has been working with Microsoft to use both the user data, the anonymous user data that Microsoft collects about the people who use its software, as well as our own research chops to sort of think about what this relationship looks like. And so just about a month ago, about 6 weeks ago, we published a third in a series of reports on um, the great reshuffle and what's the future of work and hybrid work. And I know we have a lot to say about this topic, both of us, because brand in some cases should drive what our approach to this world is like. So we're happy to sort of, I think I'm already feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. So
No, it's yeah, no,
there's
it's
interesting things that are happening out there, and there's I'll throw in some data from the study as we go through our conversation today. But there's a lot of really rich stuff in here, and some of it, backs some of the trends we're seeing out there, and some of it reflects that not everybody is along for the ride yet in getting this hybrid work situation just right.
yeah, no, you nailed it, and that's why you and I connected. Yeah, I suppose we'll fill in some of the backstory. You and I met, I think, like 18 months ago, kind of the depths of the pandemic. Our paths crossed. Met randomly through lunch club and got connected there. And then you went on to move into this space, and epigraph being yes, we're brand innovation design, kind of an overlapping consultancy. These are very much the conversations I'm having, both with large established players and some of the more younger incubating startups, venture stage companies who are figuring out how they want to set the tone going forward. They haven't locked in the path that they're going to take their organization, and it really gives them the opportunity to say, well, who do we want to be? Who do we want to be in the world? And before they sort of lay those tracks down, they can figure out, okay, what is our culture? What does it want to be? And yeah, it's just fascinating. So it's something that we both geek out over, absolutely. And just fascinating. We may so just really excited and interested to tap into your learning. And I know you're sort of on the cutting edge with unpacking this with Microsoft and cultivating just the learnings around it.
Sure. And I can sort of hop into sort of, couple of things. One is I don't think it's news to anybody that there is talk about this going on right in the media right now. There's some company trends that are happening out there that may be reflective of or are not reflective of Edelman's clients. But we're all sort of watching Elon Musk take a very big stand on getting everybody back into the office for at least 40 hours a week. I guess if you can distribute that across 3 days, he's okay with it. Or even 2 days if you wanted to, I suppose. But there's this sort of ultimatum about return to office that he's really putting out there. And, there's a number of people, including my friend Paul McKinley, who he and I did a panel at a conference a couple of months ago, who just think it's completely tone deaf. And this seems a little bit extreme to say, but it's on the wrong side of history, in terms of this is how a leader needs to lead. Yes, it's definitive and it's clear and it's decisive, but in terms of it reflecting a reality that almost the entire rest of the workforce, and when I say workforce, I'm really talking a lot about knowledge workers here. Um,
Yeah.
but when it reflects a reality of not when it doesn't reflect the reality of what a lot of people are going through in terms of the flexibility that they now have, that the choice they now have. One of the really great quotations we got from somebody in this Microsoft study is, "I can't find a new family, but I can find a new job." So people's priorities have shifted, and so for executive leaders to sort of I don't want to say not acknowledge that, but just set it aside as part of how they're thinking about how they're going to lead, I think is challenging and short sighted. Um,
Yeah.
and we've seen Apple sort of take a stand on this, like this is when we want you here, and Google to a certain extent as well, and they're sort of walking that back a little bit. Okay, well, we're going to adjust because it doesn't seem like people are really comfortable yet. Part of that's related to COVID. Part of that is simply related to the fact that we've now gotten into a groove for how we had this adjustment period. We sort of worked through the really icky adjustment of working from home a majority of the time, and companies are learning that they might have to shapeshift along the way.
Yeah, no, and I'm wondering if there's some generational difference, or just, based upon life station? Did the study reveal that there were cohorts that were more interested, or different, or even groups that were more interested in returning to the workplace versus, who are being more reticent? What was was there any findings around that? Because it seems like, from what I've heard, there are some different views, and whether that sorts along generational lines, maybe not.
There's some of that for sure. So a couple of things. Well, the first one is not necessarily generational, but it's where people are right now. And what I mean by that is basically half of the people who are working remote right now say they want to switch to hybrid in the next year, about half. At the same time, about half of the people who are working hybrid right now say they want to switch to being fully remote. So but what's interesting to me about that, like if I sit back and I think about what the implications of that are, it's kind of like, are we moving into this sort of new, and how this impacts how companies want to plan for office space, and sort of the operational components of this is also kind of fascinating. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's sort of like, when you are you going to be more hybrid or more in office when you're first in a role, or you're first promoted, or you're first bringing somebody on, and then so there's sort of this step forward moment where you're spending more time with people in person, and then there's this step back moment when you're just kind of jamming in your particular role, like, is there a 6 months on 6 months off kind of thing, or 3 months and 9 months? I kind of feel like we're moving into a cycle that's more like that, where people will want to make those swings more frequently. Um, and so, helping people be successful as they make those transitions, I think, is going to be really interesting. But the other piece is tied to the building of social capital. And, um, you know, if the nature of the world of work has changed and our relationship to it has changed, we need to rethink how we're building social capital in the workplace. And this is one of the major findings of this study, is rethinking how we build social capital. The challenge of rebuilding, and Gen Z, who's never had the chance to build social capital outside of potentially a classroom, or people who are new to the workforce, they might not always just be Gen Z. But so we can't count on the office as the place for building that social capital is going to be happening. The challenge with that is, well, so then how do we do it, right? But the challenge is that only 30% of leadership people who are leaders in this study, 31,000 people globally, believe that providing networking opportunities leads to business impact. And so half of employees, though, people who are not in leadership roles, want there to be built-in virtual ways of networking so that they can get to know their colleagues beyond the emails and the pings, the things that are tied to project-based work. So, so then the challenge is, how do we convince those leaders to do it? And there's really good data around this, which is to say that people who report having good relationships at work outside of their immediate team also report better well-being, 76 to 57%. They also report being more productive, 50 to 36%. And they also report being less likely to change jobs in the next year, 61 to 39%. So if those things don't lead to business impact, I'm not sure what does. So I think it's helping leaders see the fact that creating those opportunities to build social capital in a structured way, in an intentional way, in a way that's not just another meeting and has a direct project or client outcome, internal clients or external clients, is valuable in retaining a workforce, which means less operational costs, in higher productivity. And I mean, we're already up to here with productivity. We became productivity at the expense of our own burnout because we were so distracted by what was happening initially in the pandemic. And we're just healthier, which means actually less operational costs. There's less your health insurance premiums, like all of those, you can negotiate better rates, all those different things play into that. So it's a long answer to your short question.
Oh yeah, and it feels like the answer isn't more because like early in the pandemic, it was, oh, let's just have a Zoom happy hour on Friday, and we can put on fun, bring props, and we'll put on the Insta filters and all of that. But it feels like there needs to be something more. I mean, it feels like okay, we're getting to a later stage of this, and it wants a more evolved solution than we've experimented with preliminarily, right?
Yeah, it's a both and, right? You still
Yeah.
need those sort of silly moments where you can just be social, but at the same time, how do we create opportunities for people to see across the organization and learn from their peers, or just to get to know what do you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and to be really intentional about how that gets done, and not just, I've been a part of an experience where people were just said, hey, show up at this place on this time and we're gonna have a really good time and get to know each other, and everybody basically stayed in their cliques, and so like nothing happened. And that's, we have to be more structured. One of my clients has actually been really intentional about this. They have separated their employees into three different work roles, right? Required in office, fully remote, and hybrid. Very simple. You sort of know where you lie in that model. But what they shared is, for the hybrid folks and required in office folks, there's a very it's not prescriptive, but it's a very clear list of, here are the occasions on which you might want to be in the office, or ask your team to come into the office if you're a manager of people. And I've seen so few companies actually just take a stand. I've heard very vague things like, if you need to be in the office, be in the office. Well, what is that? The need, it might be perceived as different from person to person. So how can we codify that? How can we create some agreed upon ways of working that are informed by our brand and our culture, right? And our mission and vision, depending on what your construct is in your organization, um,
Yeah.
to get there.
Well, and that's where it overlaps with, where this is where I'm more comfortable with in the vision and values space of, okay, is in person more in line with what are your larger organizational values? What's the type of environment you're trying to create? What's the goldfish bowl you're trying to, formulate? Is it contingent upon face-to-face human interaction, or are there creative ways where you could achieve that through a hybrid model? And I like your point about it not necessarily being either or. Maybe it is primarily remote, but you take those savings of having a smaller office footprint, and you have a really amazing offsite once a year where you give people that these gathering becomes more of a tent pole opportunity. When you're there in
Yes.
person, it's meaningful. It means something because we don't always see each other face to face. So because of that, this weekend, this 4 days or whatever, we're going to make it really special. We're going to intentionally curate the experience so that this little bit, we'd love to see each other more, but this little bit will kind of tide us over until the next time we can gather.
Right, right. And we're seeing more and more of that. Hi, Sophia. Um,
We had some
good to
technical
see
difficulties,
you.
so it was a little slow getting it live.
That's
But I think
okay. We're here. Awesome.
we're here.
Um,
Um,
so no, we're seeing more and more of that. People wanting to do retreats, um, and not necessarily the big glitzy offsite, but a really sort of intentional way of spending time together. Maybe out of a hotel conference room, or an office conference room if there's still office space. That kind of a thing. So I think
yeah.
you're spot on, Tom, in terms of pointing that out as one of the ways forward.
Yeah, I feel like there's conferences that have popped up that are the unconference model, where it's like you realize that those best conversations do happen tangentially on the halls outside of the main event. So, the intent being, how do you curate those small group experiences that are impactful and lead to, those fortuitous insights or connections. So, love it.
Yeah, this is perfect. This is actually tied to another one of the takeaways from this study, which is that workers now have a new worth it equation.
Mm.
What makes setting aside the things that they might want to do in their own lives for doing something, like coming into an office for work. Again, the quotation from the employee that I talked about, I can find a new job, but I can't find a new family. So like, how are employers thinking through what makes the expenditure of discretionary effort worth it for that particular employee when we've been doing so many similar things from our homes for the last 2 years? So there's a lot there's a lot in there, and the reason that people are sort of rethinking this worth it equation is because um, there's a ton more involved in work. Our workday is now 13% longer, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 46 minutes a day that we probably used to spend commuting, that we're now working. We start earlier, we end later. It might be chopped up differently in between, but we're starting earlier, we're ending later.
That's
We
the
have
counterintuitive finding, right? Like, we thought that going remote you'd time condense it, but we've seen that work just expands to fill the commuting time, right? I mean, we're saving, for those of us who used to drive, physically go to an office, we're like, oh, brilliant. We'll have, between half hour, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of extra time a day. And then work has just sort of expanded to fill that, particularly with hiring being what it is, and more, there being the demand for just all hands on deck right now, right?
Right. Well, and then the idea of flexible work too goes into that, right? It's like, well, you have the flexibility. So I mean, just because but we tend not to step in and step out. We tend to step in and then check again later.
Yeah.
So there's actually one of the this is a lesser trend, but one of the data points that we also saw in this recent study is there's normally a 2 peak workday. Your workday usually peaks at around 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. local time. We're just there's a cycle. The 10 a.m. peak is higher than the 2 p.m., but they're both fairly high. There's now a new peak at 10 p.m. where people have put their kids to bed, they've had their dinner, they've done whatever they've needed to do they've gone to the gym, they've if they're doing that, like they've done the social thing with their friends, but then they come back and they get a little bit done for the next day. Not a huge trend, but significant enough that it was worth reporting on in the data. So the workday is longer. We have 152% more meetings on our calendars than we did 2 years ago. That's quantity. Those meetings take up 252% more time than they did 2 years ago. And so that's the workday getting longer, right? 13% longer, more meetings. Those meetings take longer, but we're also getting a third more pings from people, and we respond to half of those pings within 5 minutes.
Yeah, there's that expectation of instantaneous availability, right?
Yes. So not only is the day longer, it's more intense.
Man.
And
that's
so
cultural. That is fundamentally, if the culture, and granted, service level agreements being what they are, in the perfect world, but yeah, there is this expectation, of an increasing speed, increasing, always 24/7 availability. Wow.
So
Yeah, I don't
that's
know.
why employees have a new worth it equation, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is a part of me that
Longer
finds it.
intense, like something has to give.
Yeah, the fact, checking, and I'm like, in full transparency, I'm an early to bed type guy, but just like the thought of, when all the studies that show that, like, the blue light that you get right before bed, like checking email at 10, every physiology study shows that, like, that is the worst. Like, you're loading your brain, you're priming that, you're waking up your limbic system with that, with the light. It just feels so not right. It feels so unhuman. Like, it feels like very anathema to good life, especially as we see how vital good, productive sleep is. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to derail.
You didn't. You didn't. It's they all of these things play a part, and I think the gift of the pandemic, if you will, is that these very human traits, these very human things, actually do impact our ability to be productive, to be successful, to be loyal. And so, really helping. Really, and so my job, is to help employers balance all of those things with the direction they need the business to go, because not only has our relationship to work changed, the world has changed. And so what we need to do in order to respond to that world is necessary. And, I mean, I could go on for days about all the trust barometer research that we have at Edelman as well about, people expecting their employers to speak up on social issues, racial justice issues, those and ESG related issues, part of which I just talked about or just mentioned. That's a whole conversation for another day, Tom. Maybe that's our next one.
Yeah, yeah, I
um,
know.
but
Yeah, loyalty, the
net net,
concept of loyalty is there's so much to unpack there, right?
yeah, but it's all tied to whether and how we recognize the humanity of our people.
Yeah, no, I think you tapped right into it. I mean, that's why, our mission, something I've been really interested in, is supporting those brands that are looking to bring humanity back into the equation, because it is so easy as things automate, as society automates, and we see some amazing benefits from AI models. I think it's who is it? Noah Yuval Harari in *Sapiens*. He talks about the cyborg model, where AI in the near future is very likely going to be just a super brilliant virtual assistant that like a centaur sits alongside of you and makes you a better human. But the risk is that that automation does sort of stomp on the human side of the equation. So I think reminding ourselves organizationally and then at a personal level of our humanity. I think our humanity is something that we do well to be reminded of, daily, because AI can be dehumanizing, and organizations in certain lights can also be quite dehumanizing as well.
Yeah, and so it's all about, again, returning to what is your vision, what is your mission, what are your values, and how are you bringing those forward into the way that you're treating your people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm I may be showing some stripes here, but I'm generally not one to compliment Walmart, but Walmart actually came out with a really robust plan for upskilling employees in the last couple of weeks. Because they're thinking about home delivery with drones um, and other kinds, and using AR in the actual store and shopping environment. And so what they're doing is they're taking those frontline associates and giving them really great technical skills in order to succeed in a world where those things are just at play. I'd be interested to know what part of the curriculum includes sort of emotional intelligence, not just artificial, not just AI, but EQ, right? What kind of here's how to think about the use of these technical tools that you're using in the context of being human in the world. I want to learn more about what they're doing, but it seems like a huge step in the right direction in terms of um, what what an employer can do for an employee.
Well, and I see in talking with the multiple generations that are in the workforce right now, I see that as much more of the millennial younger aspect, where there is this greater hunger to say, okay, I'm not just exchanging, my presence for dollars. I want you to help me self-actualize. I want you to help me become a more full, robust human being. And if you do that, you will get my loyalty. You'll get me to lean in. You'll get my whole self invested in the larger thing that we're trying to work toward.
Yep, 100%,
Yeah.
100%.
No. Fascinating. Um, let's see. So did we, where we, I lost track of where we're at in the findings. Did we, was that everything?
We've kind of hit them all, to be honest. Employees have this new perspective on what they're willing to sacrifice, right? Oh, you know what? The one thing we haven't talked about is, and I talked about this in terms of the providing structured networking opportunities, right? Like 30% of leaders don't feel like they lead to business value, but half of the people feel like they absolutely need them in order to be more productive, to have better well-being, and to stay. And so, but what's also the other big challenge that the data uncovered is that middle managers This is true with every company I've ever worked with, but middle managers don't feel like the infrastructure of the organization is strong enough to actually do the things that enable that flexibility for their teams. So they feel wedged between a leader, like I'll take Elon Musk as the extreme again, like the leader who's saying you must be in the office 100% of the time, with the people who are like, I'm half hybrid now, but I want to be fully remote next year. And the infrastructure isn't there. So the client who actually said, here are the moments that might make sense for you to be in the office, that's one of the pieces of infrastructure that those middle managers need. It's just that not a lot of companies have codified or formalized what that is yet. And actually, one of the things that I see with clients is everybody else is waiting to see what everybody else has done. And
yeah, it feels
like
like there's
everyone's waiting for somebody else to either make the first mistake
because it
or
is so
make the
unprecedented. No one wants to go first and risk breaking something.
yeah. But that's the sort of the sticky wicket, if you will, for middle managers. So it's a little bit tough right now for those middle managers who they know this is important, but they, again, with our workday being longer and more intense, they don't have the time to create what that might be for their team. What they need is ground rules, infrastructure to support whatever it is that they do, that they can then adapt to serve their
Yeah.
team and
Yeah,
the
it's
needs of that
like
team.
the situation threw us into this crazy upside down time. I remember chatting with someone at Nike, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, Nike had plans to go fully remote, in 2030." And then the pandemic hit, and we're like, "Holy cow, we're going to pull this in 10 years." And the nature of what the last 2 years have been just forced the hand of a lot of organizations. So there's a bit of scrambling and catch up in
Yes.
terms of organizational structure, organizational rules, just the technological ability to allow people to go remote and work their way, the new reality that's been thrown at us and we've been thrown into.
Yeah, and what that makes me think of is, which we haven't talked a lot about yet, and also I'm not fully an expert in this area, but it makes me think about what are all the crazy benefits we're going to start seeing beyond the ones that we have already started seeing. Like, so if we are going to be fully remote, from a legal and operational perspective, we have to have a license to do business in that state or that country where
Yes.
that employee wants to live, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, and I don't know if we'll actually see those kinds of statutes change for companies. But you know, can again, I had another client who, when work from anywhere was a phrase, really tried to make that happen, and the legal hurdles of that, especially in the EU,
Yeah.
uh, the EU and not EU. So if somebody who lived in the EU wanted to be outside of the EU, the
Mhm.
legal hurdles around that were just so specific
Yeah.
and difficult that it was hard for them to actually make that a benefit for their employees. But one of the folks here at Edelman who did this research with Microsoft, her point of view is you need to blow shit up. So um, for companies that have sort of been reticent to fully adapt to this new model, now you're that much more behind, so it might require you to blow stuff up. And at the same time, if you're not a blow stuff up kind of place, what kind of shock does that create for the people who are there or for the people who've been there for a really long time? So that's a change management. That's a change
Yeah.
management piece. Like, how do you prepare people for change? How do you tell them how it's coming? You can't just flip a switch. You have to be really, intentional. You really have to plan in order to make that kind of. If you are going to blow things up, making sure that you have the right change model in place in order to help people absorb that.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely
It's
there's
sort of
definitely
like
a hurry
insurance.
up, but do it cautiously. I mean, it's like, hey, you can't take forever, but don't dive into it. Yeah, I was looking, I feel like I was talking with another client and they were talking about the cybersecurity threat dynamic portion of going remote for organizations who hadn't established
Yeah.
secure protocols and were navigating that, and just like the critical exposure that they were seeing in the early days that they've since gone on to rectify. But they were like, this revealed things that we didn't even know about our infrastructure, our employees. It's just unprecedented is an overused word, but there is this is new territory. I mean, we're blazing a lot of paths here.
Yeah, and that I'd be curious what you've run into in terms of all the tracking software, because which I often hear invoked in the spirit of cybersecurity, but also
Yeah,
productivity. I'm curious what you've run into in terms of folks who are using that.
I did cross paths with a really interesting organization that was effectively they're a global workforce automation, SaaS company, and as such, part of their product portfolio was keystroke and web camera monitoring. So when they were, and granted, a lot of their knowledge work was work being performed outside of the U.S., and it was some more production coding and things that work that was more closely tied to fingers on a keyboard, hammering out content code. But they also had a policy that was mandatory for all their VP and executives as well. So middle management had it. And I asked as I was going, chatting with them, well, if my work is sometimes creative, what happens if I take a 15-minute walk, I walk the dog around the neighborhood, and I have just that brilliant insight, that breaks through, that I can come back and it makes my entire afternoon. And they didn't have a great answer. It was like, well, you can kind of, submit that manually. But yeah, organizations want to quantify work. They want to quantify a body in front of a computer, mobile device, a screen fundamentally. But tying it back to culture, that sends a signal. It sends an unmistakable signal to the
Yep.
organization. So they have to be, I would caution, it sends an undeniable message, regardless of where you deploy it, that just says we are this type of organization that believes in monitoring in this way. Yeah, it's sticky territory. I know some organizations really love being able to quantify business outcomes, results. The traditional what gets measured gets done methodology, and there are positives to it, but it does have undeniable impacts on culture, workforce morale. It sends a message.
Yeah, I'm curious too what it, there's a certain way where that could be done with an amount of transparency, where you're saying, if we're using this data in service of how to make your experience better, and
Exactly. If there's
there are ways
coaching,
to do that.
yeah,
um, I think measuring results important, absolutely, but I think also, what are the results that you get out of making somebody's experience better because of the possession of this data. It's thinking about what is really the purpose, what is the full purpose across the employee journey, across the employee experience of collecting
yeah.
this, not just operationally or financially.
Yeah, and if that data goes into the hands of a middle manager who's supportive and is helping that employee to work better and produce, and it doesn't just become an efficiency game of, hey, 100,000 keystrokes, yesterday, 80,000 today. What's up here? If there's a more evolved way to approach it, and you're looking at just the holistic picture of wellness and just self-actualization, all the optimization stuff that comes with the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, I mean, it can be a powerful tool, but it can be an equally devastating weapon. I mean, data is fundamentally neutral. It takes on, in the hands of whoever, it takes on their capacity.
Right. And I guess the other thing that brings up for me is privacy.
Yes.
To what degree are we entitled um, to what degree are to what level, I guess, is probably the better way to say that. To what level are we allowing our data to be scrutinized? And how micro level does it actually get? Because the
Yeah,
example
is
you're
this
just talking about,
acceptable?
like if somebody's looking at the difference between my keystrokes from one day to another, that's sort of freaky.
Well, and then if it goes beyond the keyboard to your webcam, I mean, fundamentally, the room in which you're working is effectively, in a way, compromised, right? I mean, you don't know what you can't use that computer for anything else. You can't use it for personal,
No.
you use that becomes an exclusively, which is okay if that level is set and there's an expectation there. But yeah, it opens up a big can of worms.
And where is that data stored and for how long? And sorry, woo,
Yeah,
rabbit hole, rabbit
yeah,
hole.
yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Well, looking at pragmatically, any bring it back to best practices, or if are you seeing the rubber meet the road in any really compelling ways? Are there organizations in your orbit or industries in your orbit that you feel are doing this, whatever this is, this current moment of work particularly well? Is there anything that you take away as say, okay, this is a best practice, a repeatable best practice that we've identified that contributes to engaged employees, great work culture, open environments? What's good, what's working right now at this point in time, at least may not work years down the road, but in this month in 2022, can we at least hang our hat on something and say, okay, organizations who do X will succeed in this type of climate?
Yeah, here's your 30-day guidance.
There you go. Yeah, I'm trying to get pragmatic here and say, okay, what's
Uh,
prescriptive?
yeah, no, that's a really smart way to sort of wrap up all the broad territory of things that we've covered today. And it's always good to have a conversation with you, Tom, because we just do that.
Just want to leave it in a little bit more of a positive light. I mean, like let's bring some hope and light and goodness
For
into the
sure.
equation and say, okay,
Yeah. No, I think, and I know I've mentioned this a couple times, but I just can't stress it enough. Even if it feels like really obvious or really basic, just codifying and providing people guidance on what are the times where you want to bring your team together
mm,
physically, right?
mm,
Um, what are the rules about remote work, not just legally but also just like what is within the realm of our organization? So really building that infrastructure, being thoughtful about that infrastructure, leaving that infrastructure open to change, right?
mm,
Saying we're going to try this for a period of 60 days, 90 days, see how it goes, and then shift or pivot if we have to, right? Depending on what your feedback is. So it's not only, it's that kind of, it's that step forward but also step back, right? Step forward,
mm.
we want to actually give you something that you can work from, but then we need to step back and evaluate it. And I think, there was a, I forget who published it this week, there was a really great article I read about, CHROs and CIOs are working together more and more.
Hmm.
um, because again, that where we're getting the data, how we're managing that data, and how we're using it for people, I think is really important. That can help you build that infrastructure.
Yeah,
Um,
I love it.
the next thing is, and I'm actually experiencing this right now as well with one of my clients, which is, um, I'm helping sort of a second tier leader develop their argument for their CEO around, here's why your approach to us back in the office X% of the time isn't working.
Hmm.
Um, and what are some foundational things that we already have in our culture and in our principles that will help us actually make the shift in a way that makes sense to the people who've been here forever, as well as the people who haven't been here for forever or who haven't been in the workforce for a really long time.
No,
So
like it.
um, so using data and workforce listening in order to understand what it is that your people are saying they need, what those middle managers want, but also then how can you how can, how do you bridge that middle ground between what senior leadership wants to go and do and the ambitions that they have and all the growth they want to achieve, and again bringing that human element in there. So um, the best practice there is using data to inform how to bridge that gap.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's great.
and I think probably the third thing that I've seen is how to put this into words is there's sort of I don't even for all we talked about prior to the pandemic was digital transformation, digital transformation, digital transformation. I think what I've seen a lot of companies be really successful at, not a lot, I've seen a few companies be really successful at doing, is finally taking the time and the investment to knit together all of the legacy systems that
Mm.
create an easier, more productive, shit just isn't as hard to do experience for their people. Like that investment is finally worth it to companies. I think
Yeah.
because of the distributed nature of the workforce. But that's the best practice is really, have we sat down and looked at why things are still so difficult to do, or why they've gotten harder because we're distributed,
Yeah.
and getting at the root causes of those things. Companies who do that are ultimately already ahead of the ones who have put that on the back burner because they feel like, and in some cases for legitimate reasons, because the pandemic tanked their business for a year, the supply chain tanked their business for a year and a half, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, you're seeing this, yeah, and that maps to, in addition to the shortage, workforce shortage, low, unemployment, the fact that good talent, there's more questioning now of, does this job actually need to get done? Because we might not have the human hours available to throw at it. Where can we find these efficiencies? Because we simply don't have the hands to do that thing that we once upon a time thought was efficient. Oh, and layer onto that the nature of a totally disrupted supply chain where in general, the bandwidth, the extra, squishiness available, the excess in the system is been drained, and we're operating in leaner terms across the entire economy. Labor is leaner, supply chains are, we thought they were lean before, they're really lean now. And just an environment of scarcity, operating in an environment of scarcity and not seeing that as, hair on fire emergency, but just saying, okay, this may be the new reality. Scarcity, we've been used to abundance, given, the macroeconomic cycles for the last 7 years. We've a lot, it's easy to forget what it is like in a time of scarcity and lean. We're kind of back to lean times a little bit, and not to look at it all through the lens of the NASDAQ S&P 500, but I think that is a key indicator.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, and another thing we didn't, well, yeah, I'm gonna not go there. But the I think you're right in that the broader economy and how the Great Reshuffle has contributed to what's happening. Automation is the new best grunt worker. I
Well
agree.
said, Jake. I know Jake, and he is a huge fan of just automating the snot out of everything. So that comment is on brand for Mr. Tlopik.
Well, and I think the thing to remember there is that's how we're knitting things together. It's not what we're doing to replace people, right?
Yeah.
It's how we're knitting things together so that those people can do, one, so they can do things they never thought they would be able to do, and two, it allows them to focus on the things that actually matter. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then just, yeah, I mean, automation can be, there are jobs that have this, this is a loaded statement, but there are jobs that have been done by humans in the past that are not conducive. They're not best if done by humans. They're not good for the humans doing those jobs, whether they're repetitive or,
yeah,
they're damaging to the psyche over long term. And, there is, in a time of disruption, that can create challenge, but at the end of that, you free up that human capital, those human work cycles, for better work that is more suited to humans. And like we were talking about earlier, you up level the humanity. We don't lose ourselves to automation and the algorithms. We stay human, and we are elevated by those algorithms. We're made more human. We're made more compassionate, as opposed to we just become the soft, squishy things in the machine that do the things that the automation can't, yet, yeah. Good stuff. I don't know where that leaves us, but I feel like we've meandered all over. I really appreciate, man. I always enjoy conversations, Evan. There's a reason why I tap you. You're my go-to for things around in this space, the state of employee culture, where this is going, because I appreciate how you're looking out and you're looking at the big players in the space and saying, okay, what is the new normal, and how do we navigate the new normal? And we can curse the way things are right now, or we can say, okay, this is the nature of the new environment. Let's make hay out of what we've been given. And yeah, it may not be great, it may not be what we desire, but let's just navigate it the best we can, and bring good business outcomes and good human outcomes out of it fundamentally.
Absolutely. So yeah, the three best practices: build your infrastructure, use data to influence change from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom, and look for opportunities to streamline and automate. Even if the business has forced you to look for different ways to do that for the consumer, now look for ways to streamline and automate for your people.
And I'm going to layer on top of that, seek out the humanity, seek out opportunities for humanity
Yeah,
in
in
the
all of
realm of
those things.
automation. Double down on your people. Listen, even when headwinds are at you, you won't go broke. Just tapping into the human side of the equation. Don't lose the humanity in the face of the opportunity for automation.
Yes. So if I were going to make this a table, humanity across the top,
Humanity.
infrastructure, data, automation as the three pillars underneath it. Love it.
Love it. There we go. There's the infographic. We just summarize the entire package, in an hour.
I love it.
Evan, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you keep a busy schedule, and I know we've been talking about this for a long time. We finally just said, okay, we're not going to bump it anymore. It may not be perfect, it may not be polished, but I always love sitting down with you and kicking it back and forth. And
Yeah.
I'm stoked this is going to be, it was live, but it'll also be archived. So I'm looking forward to sharing it with people who I know who are in this space, because I think it was just entertaining, engaging, informing. Just appreciate you, man. Thanks for being you and doing what you do over there.
Back at you, my friend. Always appreciate talking with you, and thanks for making all this happen today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. All right. Well, till next time. We'll have to do it again.
Bye, everybody.
See y'all.